there, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you. If you're returning, I'm equally as excited to have you here today. But if you are new and you're interested in true crime or weird sort of things like paranormal stuff, which I plan on adding later on this week, and paranormal conspiracy stuff like that, if that's something you're interested in, you can go ahead and click the little subscribe button down below and the little bell icon so you can be notified when I upload. We'd be really excited to have you join our little community. But I hope that you are doing so well. I hope that if it's morning, afternoon, night, whenever you're watching this, I hope you're doing well. I do want to give a little bit of a warning though, that the things that we do discuss here can get kind of heavy. So if that's something that you cannot handle, just go ahead and click off this video. I'll catch you somewhere else, but your mental health is always going to be more important than a YouTube video ever will be. But with that, we'll jump right into today's video. Have you ever seen this movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose? I don't know about you guys, but this movie scared the absolute bejesus out of me. It was one of those movies, when I was little, I didn't like horror films at all. I didn't like scary things. I didn't like anything like that. And by little, I mean like early teens. And all of my friends really liked it. And so one night I forced myself to sit through this movie and it scared me so bad. Man, this movie scared me. But it's talking about demonic possession and those kinds of things. And so I grew up pretty religious. I still am. I'm not religious. I'm more spiritual, but I do believe in a higher power. And I also believe that if you believe in a higher power, then you have to believe in the opposite. So like, you know, God and the devil. But so this movie did scare me because demonic possession was always something that was discussed in church and those kinds of things for me. And so demons always just terrified me. I was always afraid, you know, being possessed by a demon and those kinds of things. And so this story really talks about demonic possession and just like real life experience, I guess, and how many times people can be misdiagnosed. And I do think it's an interesting story, but we'll dive into it. The story is based on a true story, what people believe is the possession of Anneliese Michel. And I'm sorry if I butchered her name, but it is a very scary story and it is also a very tragic story. So we'll go ahead and dive into Anneliese's story today. So like I said, The Exorcism of Emily Rose is loosely based on the story of Anneliese Michel. Anneliese was born on September 21st of 1952 in Bavaria, Germany. She was one of 5 children. She did lose her older sister due to complications in surgery when she was younger, but her family was very religious. Both her mother and father were devout Catholics, and this led Anneliese and her sisters to also become devout Catholics. Anneliese's parents owned a sawmill that was pretty close to their home, but both her parents spent a lot of time there so that they were able to provide a life for their children. They were dedicated parents. They wanted to, you know, provide a good life for their kids. And this would leave Anneliese and her sisters in the care of their grandmother, who was a very religious woman. She would often make the girls read religious texts and those kinds of things. And this really made Anneliese become very devoted to her own Catholicism, and she was very dedicated to her religious studies. Anneliese did have a couple of health complications as a child. She developed mumps, measles, and scarlet fever all before the age of 5. She was described by classmates as quiet and very religious. So the context of religion is really going to follow Anneliese throughout her entire life. Anneliese had her first strange experience in 1968 when she was in high school. Anneliese didn't remember anything from this episode that she had in high school, but her friends said that she was walking around in a trance-like state. And like I said, Anneliese had no recollection of this episode whatsoever, but she did come to and continued her day like normal. But later that night, Anneliese would talk about an experience she had where she was asleep and then all of a sudden she woke up and she felt like there was a very heavy presence on top of her, pushing her down. During this experience, she did wet the bed and she was unable to move or talk or yell for help, so it seems a lot like she had sleep paralysis that night. It would be another year before Anneliese had another experience that was similar to this, but this time she remembered the entire thing. Once again, she woke up in the middle of the night and she wet her bed again and felt like she couldn't move or speak. This time she remembered the whole thing and she told her parents about it. Her parents took her to their family doctor, and that was Dr. Vogt, and he recommended that the family go see a neurologist. This was Dr. Luthi. So Anneliese would go see Dr. Luthi, and he would run a series of tests to try to see if there was something going on in Anneliese's brain that would explain these experiences that she was having. Dr. Luthi also ran an EEG, which is a test that measures brain activity and can help with the diagnosis of epilepsy. After they got the results of Anneliese's test, they realized that there was nothing abnormal in these tests, and so they decided that it was probably some form of seizure. They decided against medication at that time since the seizures, or what they thought were seizures, were so far apart that medication wasn't really necessary. So Anneliese went back to school and kind of went back to her normal life, but then she started getting more illnesses, and she was starting to develop more complications when it came to her health. She had to have her tonsils removed, and then she got pneumonia, and then she got something called pleurisy. And pleurisy is a condition that causes inflammation of the tissue that lines the lungs and chest cavity. In January of 1970, she was moved to a hospital. And then a month later to a clinic that specialized in pulmonary issues with young adults and teenagers. It was during her time at this clinic that Anneliese experienced another seizure. It was after this seizure that her family decided to take her back to the neurologist, and they ran the same test again to see if maybe something had changed, and they were able to see if anything was going on in Anneliese's brain. Again, it came back pretty normal. There might have been a couple of things that were a little bit abnormal, so they decided to prescribe her an anticonvulsant and also an anti-seizure drug. Any time that they would run these tests, they would find that Anneliese might have had a few abnormal brain patterns, but nothing that would explain the seizures that she was having. After getting these medications and spending time in this clinic, Anneliese was sent home. And this Anneliese, she just came back and she was just so different. She described to her family that while she was at this clinic, that she would see demonic faces and hear demonic voices. She also said that she could smell she would be able to smell a smell that was like burnt feces. Anneliese also told her family that these visions and these sounds and these smells had followed her home, and that she was still experiencing them while she was at home. And this really started to affect Anneliese in her everyday life. She was becoming more withdrawn, and she just kind of wanted to stay to herself. She also developed depression, as I think anyone would when you begin withdrawing yourself and seeing those kinds of things. She just became more withdrawn. She was normally a great student. She loved going to school. She loved studying, but she didn't want to go back to school anymore. Anneliese was afraid to go back to school because she thought that she would have these episodes at school, and she began failing her grades, and this was just very unlike her. Her episodes of body stiffness and seizure activity would continue, so her family decided to take her back to Dr. Luthi's office, and he prescribed her an even more powerful drug to fight against the seizures. After this, her seizures would stop, and she was able to go back to a relatively normal life. But while she was able, the seizure activity was stopping, she did still say that she was seeing the voices, or seeing the faces and hearing the voices and smelling the burnt feces smell. But things seemed to be getting worse, as the voices would tell her that she was going to rot in hell and that she was damned to hell. Her parents seemed kind of split on what they thought was going on with Anneliese. Her father thought that she was struggling with epilepsy, and her mother really believed that this was a demonic possession. Anneliese's mother talked about a time where she saw Anneliese standing in front of a statue of the Virgin Mary, and her eyes were jet black and full of hate. Anneliese contracted measles again, but this did not stop her from graduating. She was able to graduate in 1973, but things just seemed to be getting worse. Her family was starting to notice that she had an aversion towards religious items. So there was a time where her family went to a shrine, and she said that she was unable to walk into the shrine because it burned her feet. She also said that she couldn't stand the smell of holy water, and she wasn't able to look at any religious items. And this just caused Anneliese to fall into a deeper and deeper depression. She was beginning to have thoughts of self-harm, and she was just really struggling with her mental health. Her family decided to have her meet with a priest, and the meeting with the priest seemed like completely normal. Anneliese was able to present herself very well, and the priest didn't seem to have any kind of thoughts of demonic possession or anything like that. He seemed like she was just sick with epilepsy, that there was some mental health issues going on, and he really decided that demonic possession wasn't the problem. This priest recommended that she just continue seeing her neurologist, but when the priest went and spoke to one of his friends, another priest by the name of Father Alt described hearing about Anneliese's story and immediately knowing exactly what was going on. He said that he knew what Anneliese was feeling and all those things. He said that he just had this almost divine connection to Anneliese. He said he felt like a radiation coming from Anneliese to him. He would read, Father Alt would read letters written by Anneliese, and he said he couldn't finish them because he was so overcome with nausea. All of this led Father Alt to believe that Anneliese was in fact possessed. It was during this time that Anneliese had graduated. She had graduated, she was going off to college, and she was doing well at her studies. She wanted to be a teacher. When she was away at college, she met a boy named Peter, and they seemed to hit it off. They seemed like they were having a great relationship, but Peter wasn't religious, and Anneliese was very, very dedicated to her religious studies. She was very excited about her religion. She was very excited about her spirituality, and she wanted to become a very devout Catholic. And when Peter wasn't religious, she said that she was unable to keep seeing him. Peter then decided to take her to a psychiatrist who would diagnose Anneliese with epilepsy and neurosis. Anneliese would continue to see Father Alt. They had met at this point and they were talking, and she continued to see Father Alt, and he strongly encouraged her to continue her dive into her religious studies and really encouraged her to continue going down this path of religion. But Father Alt also highly encouraged her to continue seeing her psychiatrist. And while she was at the psychiatrist, she said that she was having slower reflexes and headaches and nausea, and she was just experiencing all these other physical side effects from what she was going through. She also said that a lot of times one side of her body would have paralysis. As time went on, Anneliese's depression just became worse and worse. It was at this point that Father Alt went to his superior, and I'm sorry that I don't know, but I think it's like the diocese or something like that, but he went to his superior and he asked to perform an exorcism on Anneliese. This request was denied, but Father Alt was encouraged to continue doing what he was doing with Anneliese. Father Alt just encouraged Anneliese to continue her religious studies, and she started a prayer group on her campus with 2 other girls, and all of the group of girls, they were very unhappy with the way that the Catholic Church was moving forward in Germany. They thought that they needed to stick to older ways, and the church was becoming more modern during this time. But Anneliese continued seeing her doctor and she continued taking her medication, but they weren't helping. In fact, it seemed to be getting worse. Anneliese was not eating as well, and she just she didn't want to do anything. She just wanted to lay in bed all day, and that's where she spent most of her time, was in bed. She was just getting worse, and it seemed like the depression was just getting a hold of her. Things kept getting worse until Anneliese started having violent outbursts with her friends, her family, and even Father Alt. Father Alt would try to pray for her, but she would just rip the rosaries apart, and this would just convince Father Alt that it would convince him more that she was possessed. He was absolutely 100% convinced that this girl was possessed. And so he asked her family to bring her home. So that's what they did. They brought her home. And things got to the point where Anneliese stopped going to church with them because she just said she said she couldn't enter the building. She said that it burned her feet when she tried entering the building. Or before they walked into the building, her entire body would stiffen up and she was unable to physically enter into the church. Anneliese then claimed that she had had a vision of the Virgin Mary, that the Virgin Mary had said that she was paying the penance for all of the lost youth in Germany. Apparently, the Virgin Mary had told her that if she was able to suffer through the possession, that she would save many lost souls in Germany. During this vision where the Mother Mary had given her this option, she could remain possessed and it would save so many souls, or she would have the demons leave her body. But then she wouldn't save these souls. The Virgin Mary had given her 3 days to decide if she was wanting to do this. Anneliese took this to her parents and they said that, you tell her that you don't want to be possessed, that you don't want to do this. But Anneliese was had decided that she needed to save these souls and that she would absolutely suffer the penance for these people. It was after this that Anneliese decided to try to go back to her college and continue classes. But while she was moving in, her boyfriend Peter was trying to help her. As she was moving in, she began growling at crucifixes in the wall and was unable to enter the room. So Peter decided to take her back home, and Father Alt went to his superiors again and asked if he was now able to perform the exorcism. This time the exorcism was approved, but he was told to keep the exorcism completely under wraps, like no one was supposed to know about what was going on. So in August of 1975, Father Alt and another priest carried out this exorcism. During the exorcism, Anneliese complained of feeling like she was burning, and the exorcism did nothing. In fact, it seemed to make Anneliese's symptoms even worse after all of this. Anneliese started not sleeping at all. She said that she was only able to rest for 1 hour a night. She would spend hours screaming for mercy from God. She would throw herself onto her knees over and over again until her kneecaps broke and just became swollen and bruised, and then she would continue throwing herself on her knees. She stopped eating any food, but would eat the insects that she would find in her room, and she stopped drinking water, but would lick her own urine up off the floor. She would lash out at her friends and family if they tried praying for her, and she said that she was unable to pray for herself because something inside was preventing her from doing it. Anneliese told her family that there were demons inside of her telling her to hurt herself. And at this point, her family was really concerned for her health. And so they got another priest involved to try to, find any way to get rid of these demons that they believed were inside of Anneliese. When the other priest came, he had a conversation with Anneliese, and he says that Anneliese spoke in a lower tone for a while, and told the priest that it was Judas he was talking to. And Judas is the disciple that betrayed Jesus after the Last Supper, for those of you who don't know. But then, just as suddenly as she started this trance, she dropped it and was able to have a completely normal conversation with this other priest that entered. This left the next priest to believe that Anneliese was fully possessed. So this priest and Father Alt decided to go to the superiors again and ask for another exorcism, which was again granted. But once again, they were told to keep it completely under wraps because they didn't want to paint the church in a bad light. The exorcism was performed on September 24th of 1975. There was 4 priests involved. Her parents were there, her sisters were there, and so was Peter, her boyfriend. They also invited a family friend to come as well. Before the exorcism began, Anneliese was acting completely normal. She was completely herself, and But as soon as the exorcism began, Anneliese began cussing and lashing out at her friends and family, and she became extremely strong. And this is something that she exhibited throughout the entire process of this. She had this inhumane strength. Her family talked about her having an apple in her hand, and she was able to squeeze it, and it just exploded. Her friends and family all had to hold her down because she had just become so strong that one person alone couldn't hold her down. She screamed and cussed, but would not answer any questions that the priest had for her. This exorcism was also unsuccessful. This would start this whole process of multiple different exorcisms over a pretty lengthy amount of time. During these exorcisms, they were able to get some information from Anneliese, and they found that 6 different demons were inside of Anneliese's body fighting for her soul. The demons claimed to be Judas, Lucifer, Nero, Cain, Hitler, Fleischmann. Fleischmann was a German pastor who was removed from his position as he was a murderer and just a terrible man. And Cain was the son of Adam and Eve. And while her family decided to completely move away from any medical intervention or stop taking the doctor's advice completely, thinking that this was in fact demonic possession. She stopped taking her medications, and she had no medical intervention going on at this point. It was just the priests that were doing the exorcisms, and this is what they thought was going to cure Anneliese. Over 11 months from 1975 to 1976, Anneliese endured 67 exorcisms, and they would last as long as up to 4 hours. You can find the recordings of these exorcisms on YouTube if that's something that you are wanting to look into. I can't listen to them. They're way too scary, and Very heartbreaking to listen to. I've never been able to sit through any of them, and I won't put them here, but you can find them on YouTube if that's something that you're interested in. But Anneliese also became extremely frail. She went from this beautiful, vibrant girl to just being sunken in and malnourished. Her body just deteriorated over this time. She withered away to basically nothing, and she stopped eating completely, telling her family that the demons would not allow her to eat. Despite being so thin and so frail, she still exhibited amazing strength. All of this would come to a head on July 1st of 1976 after enduring multiple months of exorcisms and just a very brutal end. It was a very tragic and sad end to this story. On her death certificate, the cause of death would be listed as malnutrition and dehydration, but her autopsy revealed many very different things. She had broken teeth, 2 black eyes, broken arms, wrists, and knees, and several other wounds on her body. Father Altz and the other priest that was with him, Father Renz, and Anneliese's parents were all charged with negligent homicide in 1968. Both of the priests and Anneliese's parents were all convinced that Anneliese had died due to demonic possession. But the evidence didn't back up their claims, and the German courts, with a 3-judge panel, found the priests and Anneliese's parents guilty. The priests were charged with manslaughter and were given 6 months prison time, but that was suspended, and Anneliese's parents were found to have been through enough and they were given no jail time whatsoever. So the point of the judgment doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but if someone can explain why they would do it, that would be great. But essentially, that is the story of Anneliese Michel. There's some people who think that this poor girl was mentally ill and that she had epilepsy and many other things that could have all been solved with medical intervention. And there are many people who believe that she really was possessed by a demon or demons and that this was a divine thing. And while I personally do have a belief that demonic possession can be a real thing, and I do think that these things are very real in our world, I do believe that these things are real and that they are out there. I do think that there should have been more medical intervention with Anneliese. I think they should have dug a little deeper and they would have probably found something that would have made her life easier to live, or they would have been able to find a medication or a medical plan that could have really helped her live a much longer and happier life. But I would love to know your thoughts on this down in the comments below. Do you think she was demonically possessed, or do you think that she was just sick and that the medical intervention could have stopped it? Please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And again, if you want to, you can hit the little subscribe button and the little bell icon so you can be notified when I upload. But other than that, that's really all I have for you today. I hope this finds you well, and I will see you next time.